"Oh, come in, dear, come in. Don't you mind the old grandfather clock in the hall? Its chime is a bit loud, but it's a faithful friend. It's kept me company for more years than I can count. Let me just pour you a cup. There now, is that right for you? I take 2 sugars, always have. My Arthur, well, your grandfather, he used to say I was sweet enough without it. But a little extra sweetness never hurt anyone, I say. It's funny, the things that can send your mind tumbling back through the years. It's not always the big things, you know, not always an old song on the radio, or a familiar face in a crowd. Sometimes, it's something small, something you see every day until, one day, you really see it. For me, this morning, it was that little silver locket on the mantelpiece. You see it, just there, next to the photograph of your mother on her wedding day. It's tarnished, oh dear, yes, terribly so. It hasn't been opened in 60 years. I was just dusting, the sun slanting in through this very window, making the little dust motes dance in the air like tiny fairies. My hand brushed against it, and I stopped. I picked it up. It felt cold, but then the warmth from my fingers seemed to wake it up somehow. These old hands, they look so different now, all wrinkles and veins, like a map of a long journey. But as I held that locket, for just a moment, they were the hands of a girl again, a girl who thought she knew everything about love and forever. And that's when I remembered the day it all changed. It wasn't a Tuesday like today. It was a crisp Thursday in October of 1961. The air had that sharp, clean smell of burning leaves and approaching winter, and I was standing on the platform of the Paddington station with this very locket clutched in my hand, a decision resting on my shoulders so heavy I thought my bones might crack, a decision that would either break my heart or break a sacred promise. His name was Leo Vance. It sounds like a name from a picture show, doesn't it? He was like that, too. Larger than life. He wasn't from our little village. His family had moved in from the city after the war, looking for some peace. His father was a mechanic, and they lived in that little cottage down by the old mill. He had hair the color of dark honey, and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was often he had this way of looking at you, really looking, as if you were the only person in the world. For a girl who mostly felt invisible, that was a powerful thing, you know? We met at the village fete. I was helping Mrs. Higgins at the bake stall, my hands all floury, my apron probably askew. He came over, bold as brass, and asked to buy a scone. He didn't have the right change, or so he said. I think he did it on purpose. He just stood there, smiling that easy smile, while I fumbled in the cash box. "Keep the change," he said, his voice a low rumble that made my stomach do a little flip. "But only if you'll tell me your name." "Lily," I told him. He repeated it. "Soft like lily, that's a proper flower, that is, a good, strong flower." I'd never thought of my name that way. To me, it was just Lily, plain and simple. But when he said it, it sounded beautiful. After that, we found ways to see each other. It was all very innocent. Back in those days, a stolen conversation over the garden wall, a walk by the river, our hands brushing together, sending little shocks up my arm. He'd tell me about the city, about the noise and the lights and the feeling that anything was possible. And I'd listen, mesmerized. My world was this village, the church, the little grocery shop, and my home. A home that had grown very quiet since my mother had passed 2 years before. It was just me and my father then. My father, he was a good man, a strong man. He'd fought in the war, and I think a part of him never truly came home. He was a man of routine, of straight lines and predictable outcomes. He saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. There was no room for the messy gray areas where dreams and passions live. He wanted me to be safe, secure. To him, a boy, like Leo, with his city ways and his easy charm, was not safe. He was a disruption, a risk. Leo gave me this locket on my 17th birthday. We'd met in our secret spot, a little clearing in the Bluebell Woods. He'd saved up for it for months. It was so shiny then, it caught the dappled sunlight like a captured star. "It's empty," he said, pressing it into my palm, "so you can put a picture of us in it, when we have one. A picture of our future. Our future." Oh, the sound of those words. It was the most beautiful promise I had ever heard. I'd slip out to meet him whenever I could, my heart thumping a rhythm of fear and exhilaration. My father was a light sleeper, and his disapproval was a constant, silent presence in our little house. He never shouted, not really. His anger was a cold, heavy thing, a disappointment that settled in the air and made it hard to breathe. He had his own plans for me. He thought I might marry Thomas, the butcher's son, a steady, reliable boy who would never dream of running away to the city. A boy who would never give a girl a locket and speak of the future as if it were a place you could simply decide to go. I kept the locket hidden in my sewing box, under spools of thread and spare buttons. I'd take it out at night, when the house was still, and hold it. It was a tangible piece of the world Leo promised, a world away from the quiet sadness of my own. But secrets, dear, have a way of coming to light. They can't stay buried forever. And one evening, while I was supposedly mending my father's shirt, he came into the parlor. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me. And I knew, with a dreadful, sinking certainty, that he'd found out about us. His eyes weren't angry. They were something far worse. They were hurt. And the quiet that followed was the beginning of the storm that would change everything. The silence in our little parlor that evening was a living thing. It was heavier than the thick velvet curtains my mother had sewn, thicker than the dense fog that sometimes rolled in from the fens. The only sound was the steady tick-tock of the clock, each tick a small hammer blow against my heart. My father stood in the doorway, his large frame seeming to block out all the light and air in the room. He wasn't holding a letter. He hadn't found a note. He didn't need to. He just knew. A father knows. "You've been seeing that boy," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a low, flat voice that was more frightening than any shout. I couldn't look at him. I just stared down at the half-mended shirt in my lap, my needle frozen in the fabric. "He's not for you, Lily," he continued, stepping into the room. "His kind, they're transient. They drift in, cause a stir, and drift out again, leaving damage in their wake. They don't understand what it means to build something, to put down roots." "You don't know him, Father," I whispered, the words feeling thin and useless. "I know his type," he said, his voice hardening just a little. "Full of promises they can't keep, their heads full of air and dreams. Dreams don't put food on the table, Lily. Dreams don't keep a roof over your head when the winter winds blow. I want you to be safe. I want you to have a life of substance." His version of substance was a life I couldn't bear to imagine. A life with Thomas, the butcher's son. A life of Sunday roasts and predictable seasons, lived entirely within the 5 square miles of our village. It was a good life, a safe life, but it wasn't mine. My life, my real life, felt as if it were just beginning, in secret clearings and whispered conversations with Leo. "I forbid you to see him again," he said. The words hung in the air, final and absolute. "It ends now." I finally looked up at him, my own flash of anger surprising me. "You can't," I said, my voice trembling. "You can't decide who I love." His face, which had been so hard, suddenly crumpled, just for a second. And in that second, I saw not a tyrant, but a tired, frightened man. A man who had lost his wife and was terrified of losing his daughter, too. "Love," he said, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. "You're a child. You don't know the first thing about love. You know about excitement, infatuation. That's a fire that burns hot and fast, girl, and then leaves you with nothing but ashes." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned and walked out, leaving me in the suffocating silence. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, my father's words echoing in my head. Were they true? Was this just a girlish fancy? But then I would think of Leo's smile, the way he said my name, the solid weight of the locket I had hidden away, and I knew it was more than that. It felt more real than anything in my life. The next day, I managed to get a message to Leo through a friend, little Sarah from the post office. We met that evening, under the old stone bridge by the creek. The air was damp and cold, and the rushing water seemed to sing a sad song. I told him everything my father had said. He listened, his hands shoved in his pockets, his jaw tight. "He's wrong about me, Lily," he said fiercely when I'd finished. "He thinks I'm just a boy with empty pockets, but I have a plan. I've been saving. My uncle has a garage in London, a proper one. He's offered me a job, a real apprenticeship. I can make something of myself there. We can make something." And then, he said the words that both thrilled and terrified me. "Come with me," he whispered, taking my hands. They were freezing cold. "Don't let him do this to us. We can run away. We can get married. We'll go to London. We'll build a life so good and so strong that one day he'll have to admit he was wrong. run away. The words were a fantasy, a line from a storybook. People didn't just do that. Not people like me. I can't, I said, my voice barely a squeak. My father ... I'm all he has. And what about you? Leo insisted, his eyes searching mine in the gloom. What about what you have? Don't you deserve to be happy? I didn't have an answer. All I could think of was another promise, one made in a room that smelled of lavender and sickness. My mother's room. She was so frail in those last few weeks, her voice a reedy whisper. She had made me sit by her bed, her hand, all bone and paper-thin skin, gripping mine with surprising strength. You'll look after him, won't you, my lily flower? She had whispered, her eyes, rheumy with illness, fixed on mine. He's a good man, but he carries heavy burdens. He's lost so much. Don't let him be alone. Promise me you'll stay. You'll be the heart of this house when I'm gone. And I had promised, I promised Mama, I'd sobbed, my tears falling on her hand. I'll always look after him. How could I break a promise made to my dying mother? But how could I turn my back on the only future that felt like it was truly mine? I was trapped between two promises, two loves, two worlds. The weight of it was crushing. Leo saw the turmoil in my face. Just think about it, he said, his voice softening. I've got to go in a week. The train leaves next Thursday, 10 in the morning. I'll be there. I'll have 2 tickets in my pocket. If you're there, we go. If you're not, then I go alone. But I'll be waiting for you, Lily. I'll be hoping. He leaned in and kissed me, a desperate, searching kiss that tasted of hope and cold air. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows, leaving me alone with the rushing water and the impossible choice. For the next week, I lived in a daze. I performed my chores. I sat opposite my father at the dinner table in silence. I smiled at neighbors in the street, but inside, I was a battlefield. My heart and my duty were at war, and I had no idea which side would win. All I knew was that on Thursday morning, one part of my life would have to die. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a countdown to an execution. My own. I went about my days like a ghost in my own home. I cooked my father's meals. I darned his socks. I swept the floors. My hands did the work automatically, but my mind was miles and years away. It was at a train station, on a platform, watching a future arrive or depart. My father and I barely spoke. A fragile truce existed between us, the kind built on unspoken words and avoided glances. He thought he had won. He thought his decree had been enough to sever the bond between me and Leo. He didn't know about the 2 tickets. He didn't know about the 10 o'clock train. He saw me being quiet and obedient, and he mistook my inner turmoil for compliance. In a way, I suppose that was for the best. An open argument would have been unbearable. This quiet, tense space allowed me to wrestle with my own conscience without his constant oversight. I'd lie in bed at night, the moonlight painting a silver square on my floor, and I'd argue with myself. One voice, the voice of my heart, was Leo's. It spoke of London, of a new life, of freedom and laughter. It painted pictures of us, walking down a busy street, hand in hand, building a home that was ours, filled with a noise and joy our little cottage hadn't known for years. It was a voice that promised I could be more than just my father's daughter, more than the quiet girl from the village. I could be Lily Vance. It sounded so strong, so full of possibility. But then another voice would answer, quieter but more insistent. It was my mother's voice. It spoke of duty, of honor, of a promise whispered in a dying room. He carries heavy burdens. Don't let him be alone. How could I walk out of that door, knowing my father would come home to an empty house? Not just an empty house, but a house emptied by my own selfish choice. He was a difficult man, a stern man, but he was my father. He had worked his fingers to the bone to provide for us. He had lost the love of his life, and my mother had asked me, her only child, to be his comfort. To break that promise felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind. It felt like I would be spitting on her grave. By the way, dear, this old story has me thinking. Here I am in my little kitchen in England, with the rain just starting to patter against the window pane. It must be about mid-afternoon. But where are you watching from? What time is it there? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It feels nice to think of these stories traveling all over the world. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little cozier. Now, where was I? Oh yes, the torment of that week. I felt as if I were being torn in two. Every time I made a decision, the other side would pull me back. If I decided to stay, I would imagine Leo's face on that platform, his hope turning to disappointment, then to loneliness as the train pulled away. I imagined him walking into a new life all alone, and my heart would physically ache. I would be sentencing myself to a life of quiet resentment, always wondering what if. I would see Thomas, the butcher's son, and feel a wave of despair. But if I decided to go, I pictured my father. I saw him sitting alone in his armchair by the fire, the silence of the house pressing in on him. I saw the hurt in his eyes, the confirmation of his deepest fear, that he would be abandoned. I would be proving him right about Leo, that he was a force of destruction. I would be the source of my father's greatest pain. The guilt was a physical thing, a sickness in the pit of my stomach. The night before the train was due to leave, I still hadn't decided. I couldn't eat a bite of dinner. I went up to my room early, claiming a headache. I pulled out my little sewing box and took out the locket. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the future it represented. I opened it. The empty silver ovals stared back at me. A picture of our future, he had said. Which future? The one with him, full of love and uncertainty. Or the one here, full of duty and security. I sat by my window for hours, watching the moon rise over the village rooftops. I thought about love and what it really meant. Was it the breathless, heart-pounding excitement I felt with Leo? Or was it the steady, thankless, and often difficult act of caring for family? Was it possible that they were both love, just different kinds? And if so, how could a person possibly choose between them? Sometime in the deep, dark hours of the morning, a strange sense of calm settled over me. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace. It was just clarity. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't what my heart wanted, and it wasn't what my duty demanded. It was something else. A third path. A harder path. I went to my little desk and I took out a piece of paper and a pen. My hand was shaking as I began to write. I wrote a letter. 2 letters, actually. One for my father, and one for Leo. When I was done, I sealed them in envelopes. I packed a small bag, not with clothes for a new life in London, but with just a few things. A book, an apple, and the locket. I didn't sleep at all. I watched the dawn break, painting the sky in shades of pale pink and gray. I crept downstairs, my shoes in my hand. The house was still and silent. I left my father's letter on the kitchen table, right next to the salt shaker where he would see it when he came down for his breakfast. Then, with my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest, I slipped out the front door and began the long walk to the train station. I was going to meet Leo, but I wasn't going to use the second ticket. The walk to the station was surreal. The world was waking up around me, a baker whistling as he opened his shop, the rattle of the milk float, the distant bark of a dog. But I felt completely disconnected from it all, as if I were moving through a dream. The air was cold and bit at my cheeks, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was the thudding of my own heart and the crisp paper of the letter in my coat pocket. A letter that held the hardest words I had ever written. The station wasn't grand like the ones in the city. It was a small, provincial stop with a single platform, a little ticket office, and a smell of coal smoke and wet leaves. It was a place for beginnings and endings. For me, that day, it was going to be both. I saw him immediately. He was standing near the end of the platform, away from the few other waiting passengers. He was looking down the tracks, into the distance, as if he could will the train to appear. He looked different, more serious. He was wearing a proper coat, not his usual worn jacket, and he was holding a small, battered suitcase. He looked like a man, not a boy, a man ready to start a new life. My feet felt like lead as I walked towards him. He didn't see me until I was just a few feet away. When he turned and his eyes met mine, his entire face lit up with a smile so full of hope and relief that it almost broke me right there. "Lily," he breathed, closing the distance between us in 2 strides. He didn't hug me, not in public, but he took both my hands in his. "You came, oh Lily, I knew you would. I knew you wouldn't let me down." His hands were warm, and his smile was everything I had dreamed of. For a terrifying second, my resolve wavered. It would be so easy to just nod, to let him pull me onto that train and leave everything else behind. The life I wanted was standing right in front of me, his eyes full of our shared future. "Leo," I said, and my voice sounded strange, tight. I gently pulled my hands from his. I couldn't let him touch me. If he touched me, I would shatter. His smile faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What is it? Are you all right? Is it your father? No, I said, shaking my head. He doesn't know I'm here. I came to say goodbye. The words came out, and they hung in the cold air between us. The light in his eyes didn't just flicker. It went out completely. His face, which had been so animated, became a mask of disbelief. Goodbye, he repeated, the word a hollow echo. What are you talking about? I have the tickets, right here. He fumbled in his coat pocket and pulled them out, two small rectangles of cardboard that represented a whole world. See, for us. I can't go, Leo, I said, and this time, the tears I had been holding back began to well up, blurring his face. I just can't. Is it him? Is it your father? He asked again, his voice rising with a desperate anger. Did he threaten you? I'll go talk to him, right now. I'll make him understand. No, it's not him. It's not just him. I tried to explain, my words stumbling over each other. It's my mother. I made her a promise, that I would look after him, that I wouldn't leave him alone. He stared at me, uncomprehending. Your mother, Lily, she's gone. She wouldn't want you to be unhappy. She wouldn't want you to throw your life away. It's not throwing my life away, I argued, though it felt like it was. It's choosing a different one. It's keeping my word. My promise is all I have left of her. If I break it, I break everything. So what about our promise? He demanded, his voice cracking. He gestured with the tickets, his hand shaking. What about the locket? What about our future? Was that all just words? Did none of it mean anything to you? It meant everything, I cried, the tears now streaming down my face. It means everything. That's why this is so hard. Don't you see? If I didn't love you, it would be easy to walk away. In the distance, I heard it, the low, mournful sound of the train's whistle. It was coming. Time was running out. Leo heard it too. A look of pure panic crossed his face. Lily, please, he begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Don't do this. Don't choose a ghost over me. Don't choose the past over our future. Get on this train with me. We'll figure it out. I swear we will. He reached for me then, but I took a step back. I pulled the letter from my pocket. I wrote this for you, I said, my hand trembling so much I could barely hold it out to him. It explains it better. Please, just take it. He looked from the letter to my face, his eyes searching for some sign that this was all a terrible joke. He saw none. Slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds, he took the envelope from me. The train was pulling into the station now, a great, heaving beast of steam and steel, its brakes screeching in protest. Doors were banging open. A porter was shouting. The world was moving on, and we were frozen in our own little bubble of heartbreak. Lily, he said one last time, his voice thick with unshed tears. Is this really it? I could only nod, a sob catching in my throat. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, a howl of grief would come out. He just stood there for a long moment, staring at me. Then, without another word, he turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He picked up his suitcase, walked to the nearest door, and climbed aboard the train. He didn't look back. I stood rooted to the spot, watching the window where I knew he must be. I couldn't see him through the glass and the steam. The final whistle blew, a sharp, piercing shriek that cut right through me. And then, with a great lurch, the train began to move. It slid past me, slowly at first, then gathering speed, taking my future with it. I watched until the last carriage had disappeared around the bend, leaving behind nothing but a plume of smoke and an aching, cavernous silence. I was alone on the platform. I had kept my promise, and I had never felt so broken. The silence that descended after the train left was profound. It was more than just the absence of noise. It was a physical emptiness that pressed in on me from all sides. The station platform, which had just moments before held the entire weight of my future, now felt vast and meaningless. I stood there for I don't know how long, watching the empty tracks gleam in the pale morning light. My tears had stopped. I just felt numb, hollowed out, as if someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything that mattered. Eventually, my legs started to move, though I don't remember telling them to. I turned away from the tracks and walked out of the station. The village, which had seemed so normal on my way there, now looked alien. The cheerful baker, the familiar cottages, the winding lanes, they were all part of a life I had just chosen, and yet I felt like a stranger in it. Every step away from the station felt like a step further away from myself. from the Lily who had dreamed of London and a life with Leo. The walk home was the longest I've ever known. I didn't rush. Where was there to rush to? I was walking back towards my cage, having just held the key in my hand and chosen to throw it away. With every step, the reality of my choice sank deeper. There would be no more secret meetings, no more shared smiles, no more planning, a future that shone with possibility. There would only be the quiet cottage, my silent father, and the endless, stretching years of duty. When I finally reached our little garden gate, I hesitated. I had to face him. I had to walk back into that house and pick up the life I had nearly discarded. I took a deep breath, pushed the gate open, and walked to the front door. It was unlocked, as always. I stepped inside. The house was unnervingly quiet. The grandfather clock ticked its relentless rhythm. I walked into the kitchen, and there he was. My father. He was sitting at the table, not eating, just staring at the unread newspaper. My letter was on the table beside him, unopened. He looked up as I entered, and his face was a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. There was relief, yes, but also a deep, weary sadness. "You're back," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm back," I confirmed, my voice a hoarse whisper. We just looked at each other for a long moment across the small kitchen. I expected anger, a lecture, and "I told you so." But none of that came. "He's gone, then?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "The 10 o'clock train." He gave a slow, heavy nod, his eyes never leaving mine. "Did you have your breakfast?" The question was so mundane, so ordinary, that it almost made me laugh. Here we were, standing in the rubble of my first great heartbreak, and he was asking about breakfast, but I understood. It was his way. It was the only way he knew how to bridge the enormous, painful gap that had opened up between us. It was an offer of peace. "No," I said. "I'm not hungry. You should eat," he said. And then he did something he hadn't done in years. He stood up, went to the stove, and began to make me a cup of tea. We didn't talk about it again. Not that day. Not ever. The subject of Leo Vance was closed, locked away like the tarnished locket I put back in my sewing box. We returned to our quiet routine, but something had shifted between us. The tension was gone, replaced by a fragile, unspoken understanding. He knew I had made a sacrifice. He knew I had chosen my promise to my mother over my own happiness. And while he would never say it, I think he respected it. I had proven him wrong. I wasn't just a silly girl chasing after a boy. I was a woman who understood the weight of her word. The months that followed were a blur of gray. I grieved. I grieved for Leo, for the future we lost, for the person I would never get to be. It was a quiet, internal grief that I showed to no one. I threw myself into my duties. I became the heart of the house, just as my mother had asked. I cooked and cleaned and gardened with a fierce determination, trying to fill the emptiness inside me with hard work. Slowly, very slowly, life began to seep back in. The seasons changed. The sharp pain in my chest dulled to a persistent ache, and then, eventually, to a faint scar. About a year later, Thomas, the butcher's son, started calling on me again. He was a kind, gentle man. He didn't have Leo's fire or his grand dreams, but he had a quiet strength and a goodness that was plain to see. He was patient. He knew I was wounded, and he didn't push. He would just come and sit with me in the parlor, talking about the village, about his plans for the shop. He brought me a puppy one day, a little terrier mix that brought a much-needed dose of chaos and laughter into our quiet house. He was the steady, reliable love my father had always wanted from me. And I found, to my surprise, that it was a love I could learn to want for myself. It wasn't the lightning bolt I'd felt with Leo. It was a different kind of love, a slower, quieter love, the kind that grows slowly, like an old oak tree, putting down deep, strong roots. It was a love that felt like coming home. When I eventually told my father that Thomas, your grandfather, had asked me to marry him, he just nodded. That evening, he came to me as I was sitting by the fire. He put a hand on my shoulder. "He's a good man, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He'll take care of you. You've been a good daughter. Your mother ... she would be proud." It was the closest he ever came to thanking me, but it was enough. It was everything. It was the release I didn't even know I was waiting for. Standing there, with my father's blessing and the prospect of a new, different kind of love ahead of me, I finally felt a sense of peace. The war inside me was over. I had lost a great battle, but maybe, just maybe, I had one after all. Marrying your grandfather was like stepping out of a storm into a calm, sunlit garden. Our wedding was a small affair, here in the village church. I wore a simple cream-colored dress that I'd sewn myself, and I carried a bouquet of lilac from our own garden. My father walked me down the aisle, his hand gripping my arm tightly, a rare, proud smile on his face. When he gave my hand to Thomas at the altar, it felt less like he was giving me away, and more like he was acknowledging that I had built my own path, right here where he always wanted me. Life with Thomas was a gentle rhythm. He was a man of simple pleasures and deep kindness. He loved his work at the butcher shop, the smell of sawdust on the floor, the friendly chatter with his customers. He loved the evenings we spent reading by the fire, my head on his shoulder. He loved the garden I tended with such care. He never asked about the sadness he sometimes saw in my eyes, especially in those first few years. He just accepted it, accepted all of me, and loved me with a quiet constancy that was its own kind of miracle. He didn't fill the hole Leo had left. He built a new house around it, a warm, sturdy home where I could be safe and, eventually, truly happy. We moved into this very house, just a few streets away from my father. Our children came along first, your Uncle James, and then your mother, Sarah. Oh, the joy they brought. The sound of their laughter filled every room, chasing away the last of the old shadows. Holding my babies, I understood a new dimension of love, a fierce, protective love that made everything else pale in comparison. I would look at Thomas playing with them on the rug, his gentle face alight with adoration, and my heart would feel so full it might burst. This was substance. This was the life my father had spoken of, the one I couldn't see the beauty in back then. My father adored being a grandfather. The stern, quiet man I grew up with softened around his grandchildren. He'd let them climb all over him. He'd tell them stories never about the war, always about his own childhood, and he'd sneak them sweets when he thought I wasn't looking. In his old age, we became friends. My father and I, the past was never spoken of, but it was understood. We had found our peace. I still thought of Leo, of course, not with the sharp pain of heartbreak anymore, but with a gentle, distant curiosity. I wondered if he had made it in London, if his uncle's garage had been a success, if he had found someone to love, someone to fill the empty space in the Locket. Sometimes, on a crisp autumn day, the smell of burning leaves would transport me back to that platform, and a wistful sadness would wash over me for a moment. But it would pass. I had my life, a good life, a full life. I had no regrets. Then, one afternoon, about 15 years after I'd last seen him, a letter arrived. It was in a smart-looking envelope, with a London postmark. The return address just said Vance Auto Works. My hands trembled as I opened it, just as they had all those years ago when I'd written my own letter to him. The letter was from Leo. His handwriting was different, more confident. He wrote that he had been thinking about the past, and that he wanted to reach out. He told me he owned the garage now, that it was a thriving business. He had married a wonderful woman named Eleanor, and they had 2 sons. He wrote about his life, a good life, full of hard work and reward. And then he wrote the part that made me sit down, my hand pressed to my heart. Lily, he wrote, I was a foolish, arrogant boy back then. I thought love was about grand gestures and running away. I was so angry at you for so long. But as I've gotten older, I've come to understand what you did that day on the platform. It wasn't weakness. It was the greatest act of strength I have ever witnessed. You chose honor and duty over passion. You chose to mend something rather than break it. You taught me a lesson about love that day, even though it took me years to learn it. My life is good, and I think, in a strange way, it's because you didn't get on that train. You forced me to stand on my own 2 feet. I hope your life is happy. I hope your father found his peace. And I hope you can forgive a foolish boy for trying to make you choose. I read the letter 3 times, the tears blurring the ink. It was a gift, a pardon. It was the closing of a circle I didn't even know was still open. All the lingering wisps of what if dissolved with those words. He was happy. He had found his own way, and he understood. I showed the letter to Thomas that evening. He read it silently, his expression unreadable. When he was finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back to me. He sounds like a good man, he said, his voice quiet. He put his arm around me and pulled me close. But I'm the lucky one. I'm the one who got to see all those lilies bloom. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. My life with your grandfather wasn't a second best option. It wasn't a consolation prize. It was my true destiny. The love I shared with him was not the wild, consuming fire of my youth, but a steady, warming hearth that had kept my soul safe for a lifetime. It was the love that had given me everything that truly mattered: my family, my home, my peace. The silver locket remained in my sewing box, a memento of a girl I once was, but the true treasure was the life I had built, day by day, choice by choice, right here. So here I am, an old woman, in a warm kitchen, holding this little piece of my past in my hand. It's funny, isn't it, how a whole lifetime can be held in such a small object. 60 years. 60 years since I stood on that cold platform and made a choice that felt like the end of the world. And yet, the world kept turning, and my life, a life I couldn't even imagine then, unfolded in front of me, full of its own joys and sorrows, its own struggles and triumphs. I'm looking at the locket now. It's not bright and shiny anymore. It's covered in a dark patina, the tarnish of 60 years of being kept in a box, untouched. It looks old, it looks quiet. When Leo gave it to me, it was a symbol of a brilliant, dazzling future. A future of adventure and passion, the kind you read about in books. But the life I chose, the life I built with your grandfather, wasn't a storybook romance. It was real. It was harder and quieter, but it was so much deeper. For a long time, I thought my choice was about duty versus love, that I had sacrificed my own happiness for a promise I made to my mother. But I've had a long time to think about it, stirring my tea on quiet mornings just like this one, and I've come to see it differently. It wasn't about choosing duty over love. It was about understanding that there are many, many kinds of love. There is the first, fiery love, the kind that makes you feel like you could fly. It's beautiful and powerful, and it feels like the only thing that matters. That's the love I felt for Leo. It was real, and it was precious. And then there is the love that grows, slowly and steadily, in the shared soil of everyday life. The love that comes from weathering storms together, from raising children, from knowing someone so well that you don't need words. The love that is a quiet presence in a room, a comfortable silence, a hand to hold in the dark. That was the love I had with your grandfather. It didn't burn as brightly, perhaps, but oh, its roots went so deep, they hold me up, even now that he's gone. And there's another kind of love, too. The love that is duty, the love that is honor. Keeping my promise to my mother wasn't just a chore. It was an act of love for her, and in its own difficult way, an act of love for my father. It was about honoring the family that had made me. We live in a world now, I think, that tells us to always follow our passion, to chase the brightest star, to never settle, and that is wonderful advice for many. But sometimes, life asks more of us. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is not to run away, but to stay, to mend what is broken, to choose the harder, quieter path because you know, deep in your bones, that it's the right one. It's not about giving up on happiness. It's about discovering that happiness can be found in unexpected places. It can be found in a promise kept, in a duty fulfilled, in the slow, patient building of a life of substance. That letter from Leo all those years later was the final piece of the puzzle. It brought me such peace, knowing he was happy, knowing he understood. It proved that my choice hadn't destroyed his life, just as it hadn't destroyed mine. It had simply set us both on different roads, the roads we were truly meant to travel. Forgiveness is a powerful thing, dear. Forgiving him for making me choose, forgiving my father for his sternness, and, perhaps most importantly, forgiving myself for the heartbreak I had to cause. This locket. For years I kept it hidden away, a symbol of a loss. But now, when I look at it, I see something different. I see the strength of a young girl who made an impossible choice. I see the beginning of a long journey that led me to a different, but beautiful, destination. The tarnish doesn't make it ugly. It's a part of its story. It's the patina of a life well lived. It's a reminder that not all treasures are meant to be shiny. Some of the most valuable ones are the ones that are quiet and strong and true. You know, you will face your own train stations in life. You will have your own impossible choices, moments where your heart pulls you one way and your conscience pulls you another. There won't be an easy answer. There rarely is. But all I can tell you is this: be true to yourself, yes, but be true to your word, too. Understand that love comes in many forms. and the quietest ones are often the strongest. And have the courage to choose the path that will allow you to live at peace with yourself in the long, quiet years to come. That is a treasure worth more than all the gold in the world.